I knew this was from God. It was a very vivid, very colorful dream. And where we sat on it in 2017 was like, yeah, that would be great. We'll pray on it and see how God brings it about. Welcome to Fireside Talks, where we help bring you from survival to stability.
Through skills, support, and the hope of Jesus Christ. So for our first podcast today, we're going to start off with just some introduction type stuff and some of the things that we're currently working on. Not every episode is going to be about just what we're working on. There's going to be some skills, some support, and then obviously we'll talk about Jesus Christ too. But let's start off with who we are. We are Pat and Samantha Short. We live in Sioux Falls. And one of the things that we are working on is starting a mission for youth, specifically foster kids, that have aged out of the program. So in the past, before we lived in South Dakota, I spent about 15 or 16 years as a full-time paramedic and almost 20 years as a volunteer fireman and then a bunch of odd jobs here and there. But in about 2000, probably 12 or 13, I started to feel like I was supposed to go back to school, and specifically I was supposed to go back to school for ministry. So after a lot of debate and talking myself out of it, I did finally go back to school for ministry and ended up graduating from Johnson University out of Knoxville, Tennessee. And then it was during that time in college, we moved to South Dakota so we could enter into our first ministry. Do you want to tell them anything about you?
My name is Samantha. I had my son in 2012, and after that, I had an in-home daycare. So I just felt like God was telling me that I need to be home with my kids. Our oldest, Ruby, went to public school for kindergarten and first grade, and after that, God kept just laying on our hearts that we needed to homeschool. So we brought her home and started homeschooling her, and then we homeschooled our son all the way through. We're still homeschooling today. Trying to think. I had my in-home daycare when we moved to South Dakota. I was the preschool and daycare director at our church. I developed it from scratch. Early childhood is a passion of mine. I have my master's in elementary education, but early childhood just seems to come easy. But my passion is kids and giving them the skills that they need to be successful. One of our biggest things in homeschooling is character training and laying down the gospel and the gospel foundation for our children. This past August, so August 2025, we have adopted 3 more children into our home, and we are homeschooling them now. So we have a junior in high school, a 8th grader, a 5th grader, a 4th grader, and a preschooler. So it's a busy home. I currently substitute teach 2 days a week, and then I'm home with the kids. But God has really laid it on our hearts to start this mission so that we can serve others. In having foster care kids in our home, we see some of the trauma and struggles that they go through. Our passion is teenagers, and knowing that so many of them just age out of the system, have no support system, have nowhere to go, have no one to guide them. Their family is not a good place to turn, and they just go down the worst path possible. And God has laid it on our hearts that we need to help them.
So we probably need to back up just a little bit then and explain about 4 or 5 years ago is when we went through the classes for foster care.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think, if I remember correctly, during that class, it was an online thing. And during that class, we were one of 8 or 9, maybe 10 couples that were taking this program to become licensed for foster care. And one of the things that blew my mind is, out of those 10 or so couples that were doing these classes, we were the only ones that were willing to take a child over 5 years old. So that was, I think, probably one of our first eye openers on what's wrong with some of the foster care. And I'm not saying I blame anybody. Teenagers are going to come in with a lot more trauma and a lot more issues than a 2-year-old. But it's one of those things that it's again, nobody's fault. It's just part of the way the system works. So during that time, we've had quite a few foster kids in our home, and we're not looking to continue fostering right now, because our 3 kids that we adopted did come out of the foster care system.
He says, so yeah, not currently.
We're probably not looking at foster care any longer.
For now.
But one of the things that when we were going into this, it was never our desire to adopt. It was never a goal. I know there's a lot of people that go into foster care with the desire or the goal for adoption, but it was never ours. We wanted our goal to be reunification. We wanted to be able to come along beside the parents and help get them in a better spot, so that way their kids could come home and be with them, because we think that the best place for any of these kids are with their parents. But with that being said, when it doesn't work and we had the opportunity to adopt the 3 siblings that we had in foster care in our home, the thing that kept going through my mind is, how do we not adopt them? Because they've been in our home for 2 years now. How do you keep these kids in your home for 2 years, and then when they go up for adoption, be like, okay, good luck. I hope you find a nice family. So that's kind of what led us down the adoption path. It wasn't our goal. It was never a plan. It's just the way this happened to work. I think all of our other placements went home to families. Not necessarily did they stay there, but all but one other of our placements went back to be with family. So that kind of gives you an idea why foster care is so important to us. Now I think we need to get an idea, or give you an idea, why we're doing what we're doing, or kind of what stemmed all of this. And that comes place from a dream you had about a decade ago.
Yeah. So in about 2017, God gave me a vision of us coming along, families, like living in with them or alongside them, like in a community, helping to teach budgeting skills and cooking skills and setting up routines and things like that, things you need to get through the day-to-day that maybe they just weren't taught or didn't understand how to make it work. And I knew this was from God. It was a very vivid, very colorful dream. And where we sat on it in 2017 was like, yeah, that would be great. we'll pray on it and see how God brings it about. And then about 2020, my daughter Ruby, our oldest, had a similar vision, a similar dream, but working more with women in domestic abuse, or they went down the wrong path, maybe got pregnant unexpectedly, and coming along with them and teaching them parental skills. And it takes the community to raise children. So just being part of that community with them, helping them to build that trauma and knowing that there is another route to take other than adoption, and giving them that choice and the hand up to help them with that. So she has been sitting on that and knowing that that's God's plan for her for a while. Both of them similar, very similar. And then after our adoption, we knew that we had outgrown our home. In about 2023, the church we were ministering at closed, and we were not in a paid ministry position, but we were still ministering to our children and having a full-time job in sales. Then you could reach out to people in that way, but not ministering in a full-time paid position, I guess.
Sure.
We were, neither of our positions are permanent or unable to change. We had more, how do you say that? We were more flexible
Sure.
at this point in our lives, especially knowing that we outgrew our house, needed to move. What better than we were just thinking, what better time to grow this mission that we know that God has put on our hearts, put on our daughter's heart? What better time to build this from the ground up? And granted, that was, it was 2017 for my vision, 2020 for hers. So it kind of been on the wayside for a while. In the meantime, we had met with Eric Weber down at Union Gospel Mission and talked to him about my vision. And he's like, oh yeah, I want to do something like that too. God just confirmed my vision through him. We went and talked to him again. We were like, we can do this. And he's like, oh yeah, you can do this. Let's do it by December. So we have, it kind of lit a fire in us. God put him in our lives to confirm that this calling is from him, that this calling is true and that it is needed, and that this is the route we need to go. And so he put Eric in our lives to light a fire, and so we're following through. And so here we are.
Right. And so with this mission idea that we had, originally when we talked about it almost 10 years ago, one of the ideas was that maybe we could find like an old hotel or something that was for sale, or a motel that was being sold, and we could convert it that way. But since then, there's been a couple of organizations that have done something very similar, even one right here in Sioux Falls for veterans, where they've built tiny homes. And I think one of the cool things about having a tiny home as opposed to a motel or an apartment or something like that is it kind of gives you that opportunity to feel like you are in your own home, that it doesn't feel like it's a group home or anything like that. And I think it helps with some of that dignity and some of that pride and ownership and things like that. So we've kind of settled on the idea that maybe doing tiny homes, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have watched something on TV where they're building these tiny homes on trailers and stuff. And originally that was kind of my thought, but that doesn't really work well in the Northern Plains because of insulation, because it does get so cold during the winter. So we'd be looking more at like actual building, slab on grade, concrete foundation, tiny homes. Um, and ideally we would be serving those kids that have aged out of foster care.
Kids or young adults, because our 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 passion is to teach them and help them grow. So many teenagers, when they are aging out, many teenagers in general are insistent that they know best. So we don't want to limit it to an age. They need to be willing to want to learn. In our system, we plan on having cooking classes and painting classes and building classes. We could use more help building more houses, gardening classes and discipleship classes and church and so much more. Room checks and accountability meetings, and so more of a program that someone would need to be willing to want to learn more and want to grow more.
And I guess we have to talk about that we don't in any way envision this being a long-term housing solution for anyone. And while our focus is those youth that are aging out of foster care, or maybe have been out of foster care a couple of years and realize they're not doing well, obviously we would never turn away a mom and her kids that are trying to leave a bad situation, or even just trying to help with homelessness or something like that. But ideally, or our main focus rather, would be those kids that are aging out of the program and just don't have anywhere else to turn. You mentioned the church aspect of it, that throughout this mission, there would be a church that is planted during this time too. Because one of the things that I think we miss the boat on, that we fail often in some of these programs, because there's other organizations out there that are doing similar type things. But I think they keep the hope part of it out of it, because they're not teaching, there's not that discipleship. There's not teaching them to be a follower of Christ. There's none of that is really that character training that we kind of talked about with homeschooling. That we do have a creator. He does expect some things, certain things from us, to love our neighbors as ourselves, and how we treat people. So we would be also establishing a church on the mission at the same time, which again would be for the people that are living in the community, or in the mission, but ultimately it would just be a church that anybody can come to.
And ultimately, that church, one of the fears of people as they learn these skills and then they're just launched into the world, they no longer have that support anymore. And the church would be that support. It would be that continued support. They would not have to live in the community anymore, but we would still be a community for them to turn back to, and a support system for them to turn back to. So it's not just, you can only live here for 18 months to 2 years, and then we are saying goodbye. We're here always. Always.
And then hopefully too, that as we got outside members of the community coming into the church, they would get support through those individuals too.
Yeah, and mentors and yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So right now we're really just in the very early stages of all of this. We've gotten some support from a couple churches that we kind of have some history with. But right now, as you can see, we're in our tiny little dining room. That
preschool art.
right? But right now we're looking for property, a piece of property that's within a reasonable distance of Sioux Falls, because we still have to work. We're not looking to jump onto this property and be fully paid by the mission. I personally don't anticipate us taking pay for quite some time.
Eventually, it would eventually be the goal that we could fully focus on programming and support on the mission.
Right, but we still have a family to support.
Right, and without clients, that's not needed.
Right.
At the moment.
But so we're looking at something that's a reasonable difference or distance to Sioux Falls because we still have to come in town to go to work. But right now, I guess one of the big things we need is if this is something that you want to help us with, we need leads on property. Whether it's, my dad is getting older and he's thinking about retiring farming, and yeah, he's got 5 or 6 acres he'd sell you. I mean, no telling whatever that might be. But if you are aware of something in, say a half hour, 40 minutes of Sioux Falls, we'll put a link to our website in the video notes, and hopefully you can reach out to us if you can be any help there. And I should say that here, 72 hours ago, we launched a website. So we do have a landing page now, and it's firesidecommunity.org. That's Fireside Communities, all one word, where you can go find more information. And like I said earlier, this isn't going to be just about the mission or just about us asking for help or advice or how can you help us get this mission off the ground. There's going to be other aspects of this too. Because one of the things that we've talked about, like how many of these individuals that will be living with us essentially, how many of them know how to change the oil in their car? How many of them know how to do basic home repairs? Like, I'm sure we'll cover some of that kind of stuff.
Because you can't throw away your vacuum every time it gets clogged. How do you fix a broken belt in your vacuum? Simple things like that. Right.
Yeah. We're not talking about like rewiring an old farmhouse or anything. But some of the simple things that we should all know. And cooking, so that way you're not, eating a gas station dinner every night. Just some of those little things that we'll touch on in episodes to come later.
And it's always important to, like, it's hard if you did not grow up as a Christian, even growing up as a Christian myself, knowing how to have a good routine of being in the Bible and listening for God's word and trying to hear how he's calling you, like that, it's hard. And it's hard to get in a good routine and to know how to discern those things. And so we'll be talking about that too, and how to lay that foundation of Jesus Christ in every aspect of your life. Also, if you like what our mission is doing, if you agree with what we're trying to do, we encourage you to support us, because as much as we need land, we need the money to buy it as well. We do have a 501c3, so everything is tax deductible. We'll put our link in the show notes. There's also a link on our website at firesidecommunity.org. And we just ask that you please help support us. There's an option for a one-time payment or a monthly payment, and it's through Zephy. So that would help support us, because we can't buy land without the money for it either. So I encourage you that if you believe in what we're doing, help support us with monetary gifts as well. We'll see you next time where we talk about relationships. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.